Hey, so since this channel has basically become DIY therapy for me, I tend to spend a lot of time calling myself out for various things. Look, I'm an extremely flawed person, and I think that in order to get past those flaws, I have to be willing to look at them directly and call them out. Yes, I am weak-minded. Yes, I am a quitter. Yes, I am deeply ashamed of myself for squandering countless opportunities and ending up in a situation where I can't even sustain myself without the help of other people, and so on and so forth. And no, I don't think I'm unique in this. I think we all do a version of this self-reflection, at least to some extent. It's just that most of us have the common sense not to post it publicly and make a whole YouTube channel about it. But because of the nature of these videos, I feel like they can sometimes come off as being negative or even derogatory towards myself, almost as if I'm beating myself up. I remember when I made the dating apps and why I'm bad at them video, where I listed all of my inadequacies when it comes to online dating, and one of my best friends justifiably interpreted that as me saying, and this is why I'll never be good enough to date anyone. And so like a good friend, he swooped in and tried to lift me out of that frame of mind by reminding me of all the qualities that I have and that I bring to the table. And that's part of the reason I made the part 2 to that video, where I stated that no, I'm not saying that I'll never be good enough. I'm just outlining my inadequacies so that I can confront them. And that I'm actually very hopeful and optimistic that I can get past these inadequacies and become the type of person that's actually worth going on a date with. And that's kind of my thought process behind all these videos. I know they can seem a bit negative towards myself, but ultimately I'm very hopeful about my future and very optimistic about my ability to overcome the flaws that I outline in these videos. I just believe that in order to realize that future, I have to be completely honest with myself right now and confront the fact that in my current state, I am weak. I am not resilient. I quit way too easily. I complain about difficult circumstances instead of diligently searching for a way out of them. And that if any of my friends or family were in my position, they probably would have achieved so much more by now. Does it hurt to say these things to myself? Absolutely. But in the future, I want to be the type of person that will always acknowledge the truth about themselves, even when it hurts. And so with that thought process and that goal in mind, hopefully it becomes a little bit more clear that all of that perceived negativity towards myself isn't really negativity. It's just an attempt at being honest with myself. Sure, I sometimes miss the mark and I'm way too harsh on myself, and sometimes I'm not harsh enough, but the goal is always honesty. You can't fix a problem until you know it's there, and these videos are just my attempts at diagnosing my problems. So yeah, I hope it's a little clear that I'm not making these videos to beat myself up. I'm just trying to be a more functional human being like the rest of you. But that perceived negativity is part of the reason I wanted to make a video where I switch things up. Like I said, it's extremely important to acknowledge your shortcomings, but I think it's also pretty useful to highlight your successes, however small they may be. And so I wanted to talk about a very minuscule, very meager, important to me, but probably insignificant to literally everybody else, victory that I recently had. So in my last video, I talked about the phrase, "There's a light at the end of the tunnel," and how I wanted to change my mindset in dealing with and getting through these tunnels. Initially, I thought that by addressing my personal flaws and working on them by sacrificing things that I take pleasure in because they're not good for me, even though they make me feel good, I would be able to avoid these tunnels. But as experience has taught me, these tunnels are simply unavoidable. And so my consistent failure to avoid them would drive me into negative emotions like anger, frustration, resentment, apathy, and despair, and would fuel my habit of giving up. And so what I decided I was going to try and do was shift my focus away from avoiding these tunnels to accepting their inevitability, which is what I'm sure everybody on this planet already does to some extent. Like I said in a previous video, I'm a late bloomer. But yeah, in short, the goal was to go from avoidance to acceptance. Simple in theory, but slightly more difficult in execution. And the reason I wanted to make this video is because in possibly the most meaningless and insignificant circumstances, I managed to do just that. In a moment where I would usually curse my reality for being unfair or cruel, for putting me in a situation that I did everything in my power to avoid, I managed to mostly bypass those resentful feelings, accept that this was the reality of the situation, and focus on finding a solution to the problem. And so far, that shift in focus has afforded me all of the benefits that I outlined in that last video. I avoided resorting to harmful coping mechanisms in order to deal with those negative emotions. I maintained a less volatile social exterior and haven't been as inconsistent in how I present myself to my friends and family. And I was ultimately able to spend less time in the tunnel and potentially find a solution. Okay, so you're probably asking, well, what happened? And like I said, I couldn't make up a more insignificant scenario if I tried. But also, like I said, a win's a win. So basically, since I started making videos back in April, I've also consistently been working out. And I've distilled my workouts down into 3 main categories: strength training, cardio training, and skill training. Now, I will probably make an entirely separate video about these workouts because trying to develop and establish a routine has been an incredibly frustrating experience. One, that is still ongoing, I might add, and I definitely need to get some of that frustration off my chest. But for this video, we're just gonna focus on the cardio section. So when I first started, I figured I would do what most people do for cardio, and I decided to go for runs, and it was brutal. I have never liked running for running's sake. I'm like a dog. Give me a ball to chase and I will run all day with no regard for my personal well-being. But just running endlessly with no ulterior motive or objective, it's just not for me. But despite my distaste for running, I still committed to doing this consistently. And so I have been for the past 8 months. And in that time, my cardio has drastically improved, as you would expect. And I've always been able to lean on that fact whenever I get frustrated for not reaching my other fitness goals. Basically, I'll tell myself that, yeah, even though I don't look the way I want to look yet, I can't say that I haven't improved, which means that I can't say that this has all been for nothing, even though that's exactly what I want to say right now. So let's just keep going, because at the very least, we'll keep improving. But sometime in mid-September, I started to notice that I would get this aching pain in my knees after my runs. Now, I'd recently changed my running route, so initially I figured that that had something to do with the pain, and so I went back to my old route. But the pain persisted. So I started running on the grass parts of the path instead of the pavement. But the pain persisted. So I shortened the distance of my runs. But the pain persisted. So I stopped doing sprints at the end of my runs. But the pain still persisted. So I stopped playing basketball after my runs. And guess what? The pain still persisted. And all of that brings me to last Friday, where I had just gotten home from my least intensive cardio workout in 8 months, still had this aching knee pain, and began to realize that I was just gonna have to stop running, at least for a little bit. Now, this is usually where I'll start to think to myself, you have got to be kidding me. 8 months I've spent building up my stamina to get to the point where I could do enough cardio to actually begin to affect my body composition, and now, because of that diligence, I have to stop running? Is this a joke? All those mornings I forced myself to get out of bed to do something I absolutely despise doing because I believed it would get me where I wanted to go. And not only has it not gotten me there, it's actually hurt me. And not only that, if I stop running, all of that progress that I've been able to lean on in difficult times when I'm questioning what all of this is even for, if all of this is even worth it, is going to disappear. If I have to stop running, I am literally going to walk away from this entire 8-month experiment with absolutely nothing to show for it. My body composition has not changed and my stamina will disappear. Great. Thank you so much for this enlightening experience, but I'm gonna go ahead and quit now because clearly this has been a complete waste of 8 months of my life. Oh, and don't get me wrong, clearly I still had this thought. I stood right there and stared out at that window for 20 minutes while my knees ached and bounced these thoughts around in my head. But this time, there was another thought that was bouncing around in my head as well. Wait a minute. Didn't I just write a script about this? About these tunnels and how they're inevitable no matter what you do? I think it's safe to say that I've been in this particular tunnel since I started having this knee pain. Well, here I am again, neck deep in the anger, frustration, resentment, apathy, and despair that fuel my habit of wanting to quit and that I talked about in my last video. So what am I going to do? Am I going to continue to fixate on the fact that my commitment to running is actually what led me straight into this tunnel? Even though it's that very commitment that I originally thought would keep me out of these tunnels in the first place. Am I going to continue to curse the world for operating like this? For allowing me to go down this path for 8 months only to rip the veil off and reveal that I've actually been doing more harm than good for myself? Am I going to yet again allow this undeniable reality to force me to give up on my goals and my aspirations? Or am I going to finally listen to myself and accept that this was always going to happen? That despite my best intentions and my best efforts, I was always going to end up in another one of these tunnels feeling this way about something. And if I accept that fact, instead of dwelling on this feeling of resentment for even being in the situation in the first place, maybe I should focus on what I need to do to get out of it. And so I stood there for another 10 minutes trying to devise a plan to still get my cardio in without destroying my knees in the process. And I won't lie, I was still feeling a little spiteful about the whole situation, but I wasn't consumed by the feeling like I'd usually be. And about 5 minutes later, while I was in the shower, a thought struck me. Hey, remember those at-home HIIT workouts you used to do? Those were pretty intense, right? And as I thought about those workouts, I started to imagine them alongside the strength training and the skill training sections of my workout, and a viable picture of what they would all look like together started to take form. And long story short, I've been at it for a couple days now, and so far so good. Now I can't say that I'll still feel this way about the workout in 3 weeks time, but if that time comes when I need to move away from it, I hope I can just accept the fact that that's the reality of the situation, like I managed to do here, and not resent the quote-unquote unfairness of it all like I've pretty much done my whole life. Because looking back at the situation, I know myself well enough to know that if I had allowed my anger to consume me, I would still be in that tunnel, contemplating harmful coping mechanisms, isolating from my friends and family, and neglecting all possible solutions in favor of wallowing in my own self-pity. So in the end, I'm a little bit proud of myself for not doing that. Again, like I said, this is literally the most insignificant of scenarios and consequences. But also, again, like I said, I gotta take these wins where I can get them. But anyway, if you made it this far, thank you so much for listening to this inconsequential story. Again, I think it's important for me to document at least some of the W's along the way, however small they may be, especially because I'm constantly taking so many L's. So this really helped me to balance things out and remain optimistic. But yeah, it'll probably be back to our regularly scheduled programming of pointing out all of my personal flaws starting next week. So stay tuned for that super uplifting, feel-good content. But anyway, again, I truly can't thank you enough for watching. I know the tunnels that you all go through are way more intense, way more consequential, and way more painful, and I genuinely don't know how you guys deal with them. But I'm hoping that this is my first step to figuring out how, so that I can be more like you guys. So I really appreciate your willingness to hear me out. But with that said, I wish you all the very best going forward. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next one. Peace, and be easy.